Okay, welcome back to the BFG. So, the Queen has met the BFG, and how did she react when she met him? Were you surprised? I certainly was, because she was very polite to him, and she offered him breakfast, and she even offered to send him to school in the UK. And she also offered to get an outfit for Sophie so she didn't have to wear her nightie to breakfast. So now we're reading the chapter The Royal Breakfast. There was a frantic scurry among the palace servants when orders were received from the Queen that a 24-foot giant must be seated with Her Majesty in the great ballroom within the next half an hour. The butler, an imposing personage named Mr. Tibbs, was in supreme command of all the palace servants, and he did the best he could in the short time available. But a man does not rise to become the Queen's butler unless he is gifted with extraordinary ingenuity, adaptability, versatility, dexterity, cunning, sophistication, sagacity, discretion, and a host of other talents that neither you nor I possess. Mr. Tibbs had them all. He was in the butler's pantry sipping an early morning glass of light ale when the order reached him. In a split second he had made the following calculations in his head. The normal 6-foot man requires a 3-foot high table to eat off. A 24-foot giant will require a 12-foot high table. And if a 6-foot man requires a chair with a 2-foot high seat, a 24-foot giant will require a chair with an 8-foot high seat. Everything, Mr. Tibbs told himself, must be multiplied by 4. 2 breakfast eggs must become 8. 4 rashers of bacon must become 16. 3 pieces of toast must become 12, and so on. These calculations about food were immediately passed on to Monsieur Papillon, the royal chef. Mr. Tibbs skimmed into the ballroom. Butlers don't walk, they skim over the ground, followed by a whole army of footmen. The footmen all wore knee breeches, and every one of them displayed beautifully rounded calves and ankles. There is no way you can become a royal footman unless you have a well-turned ankle. It's the first thing they look at when you are interviewed. Push the grand piano into the centre of the room, Mr. Tibbs whispered. Butlers never raised their voices above the softest whisper. 4 footmen moved the piano. Now fetch a large chest of drawers and put it on top of the piano, Mr. Tibbs whispered. 3 other footmen fetched a very fine Chippendale mahogany chest of drawers and placed it on top of the piano. That will be his chair, Mr. Tibbs whispered. It is exactly 8 feet off the ground. Now we shall make a table upon which this gentleman may eat his breakfast in comfort. Fetch me 4 very tall grandfather clocks. There are plenty of them around the palace. Let each clock be 12 feet high. 16 footmen spread around the palace to find the clocks. They were not easy to carry and required 4 footmen to each one. Place the 4 clocks in a rectangle 8 feet by 4 alongside the grand piano, Mr. Tibbs whispered. The footman did so. And here is a picture of the footman carrying a very big grandfather clock. You can see their very special outfits that they are also wearing. Now fetch me the young prince's ping-pong table, Mr. Tibbs whispered. The ping-pong table was carried in. Unscrew its legs and place them and take them away, Mr. Tibbs whispered. It was done. Now place the ping-pong table on top of the 4 grandfather clocks, Mr. Tibbs whispered. To manage this, the footman had to stand on step ladders. Mr. Tibbs stood back to survey the new furniture. None of it is in the classic style, he whispered, but it will have to do. He gave orders that a damask tablecloth should be draped over the ping-pong table, and in the end it looked really quite elegant after all. At this point, Mr. Tibbs was seen to hesitate. The footmen all stared at him, aghast. Butlers never hesitate, not even when they are faced with the most impossible problems, it is their job to be totally decisive at all times. "Knives and forks and spoons," Mr. Tibbs was heard to mutter. "Our cutlery would be like little pins in their hands." But Mr. Tibbs didn't hesitate for long. "Tell the head gardener," he whispered, "that I require immediately a brand new unused garden fork and also a spade. And for a knife we shall use the great sword hanging on the wall in the morning room. But clean the sword well first. It was last used to cut off the head of King Charles I, and there may still be a little dried blood on the blade." When all of this had been accomplished, Mr. Tibbs stood near the centre of the ballroom, casting his expert butler's eye over the scene. Had he forgotten anything? He certainly had. What about a coffee cup for the large gentleman? "Fetch me," he whispered, "the biggest jug you can find in the kitchen." A splendid 1-gallon porcelain water jug was brought in and placed on the giant's table beside the garden fork and the garden spade and the great sword. So much for the giant. Mr. Tibbs then had the footman move a small delicate table and 2 chairs alongside the giant's table. This was for the Queen and for Sophie. The fact that the giant's table and chair towered far above the smaller table simply could not be helped. All these arrangements were only just completed when the Queen, now fully dressed in a trim skirt and cashmere cardigan, entered the ballroom holding Sophie by the hand. A pretty blue dress that had once belonged to one of the princesses had been found for Sophie, and to make her look prettier still, the Queen had picked up a superb sapphire brooch from her dressing table and had pinned it on the left side of Sophie's chest. The big friendly giant followed behind them, but he had an awful job getting through the door. He had to squeeze himself through on his hands and knees, with 2 footmen pushing him from behind and 2 pulling from the front. But he got through in the end. He had removed his black cloak and got rid of his trumpet, and was now wearing his ordinary simple clothes. As he walked across the ballroom he had to stoop quite a lot to avoid hitting the ceiling. Because of this he failed to notice an enormous crystal chandelier. Crash went his head right into the chandelier. A shower of glass fell upon the poor BFG. "Gum, hammers and bogwinkles!" he cried. "What was that?" "It was Louis XV," the Queen said, looking slightly put out. "He's never been in a house before," Sophie said. Mr. Tibbs scowled. He directed 4 footmen to clear up the mess. Then, with a disdainful little wave of the hand, he indicated to the giant that he should seat himself on top of the chest of drawers on top of the grand piano. "What a fizz-whizzing, flush-bunking seat!" cried the BFG. "He's going to be buggers are stuck in a rug up here." "Does he always talk like that?" the Queen asked. "Quite often," Sophie said. "He gets tangled up with his words." The BFG sat down on the chest of drawers piano and gazed in wonder around the great ballroom. "By gumdrops!" he cried. "What a spiffling, wopsy room he's in! It is so giganteous, eyes needing binoculars and telescopes to see what is going on at the other end." Footmen arrived, carrying silver trays with fried eggs, bacon, sausages, and fried potatoes. At this point, Mr. Tibbs suddenly realised that in order to serve the BFG at his 12-foot-high grandfather clock table, he would have to climb to the top of one of the tall step-ladders. What's more, he must do it balancing a huge warm plate on the palm of one hand and holding a gigantic silver coffee pot on the other. A normal man would have flinched at the thought of this. Good butlers never flinch. Up he went, up and up and up, while the Queen and Sophie watched him with great interest. It is possible that they were both secretly hoping he would lose his balance and go crashing to the floor. Good butlers never crash. At the top of the ladder, Mr. Tibbs, balancing like an acrobat, poured the BFG's coffee and placed an enormous plate before him. On the plate there were 8 eggs, 12 sausages, 16 rashers of bacon, and a heap of fried potato. And next time we will find out how the BFG reacts to this breakfast. Do you think he's going to like it after having to eat snails cumbers all of the time? How's he going to feel about eating sausages and bacon? We shall see.